I usually have a good morning crowd, but this is something else. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alan Tyson, and on November the 7th, 2007, I had the pleasure of interviewing Bruce Young about Coach Russell. The interview took place in Bruce's office in one of Statesboro's landmarks. Maybe you know it, Snooki's. My father and I started Snooki's in 1971. Coach said it was the home of the world's worst cup of coffee. Nobody argued with it. I think it was the best advertising I ever got. You know, I don't know what Statesboro would be like today if Coach Russell hadn't come here in 1981, or Dale Lick hadn't decided to restart football at Georgia Southern, or heck, if Vince Dooley had decided to stay at Georgia instead of leaving for Auburn. You know, I think most people think of him as a football coach, and that's what he was. But really, he was more than that. If I had to describe Coach Russell physically, well, he was a man's man is what he was. And I think the one trait that most people identify him with is his bald head. But if you didn't know him and you'd only heard of him, physically you might think he was 8 or 9 feet tall. But he wasn't. He was a normal, average person. And that's what he wanted to be. You know, I've seen him on so many occasions just sit around and talk to people. And at that point in time, that was the most important conversation he was involved in. And when they walked away from him, they felt like, you know, he was interested in what I had to say. As far as describing his personality, well, he was somewhat introverted. He didn't always initiate conversations, but he was always willing to enter into one and always had something he could add to it. He loved one-liner jokes, and he loved to laugh. I can still, to this day, I sit back there sometime, and I almost think I hear him laughing at me. Well, I met Coach Russell for the first time in 1965 when I went to Athens to play football at the University of Georgia. Of course, I didn't know him quite as well back then. He coached defense, and I played offense. And back then, your coaches were your coaches, and your players were your friends. I mean, he was a coach. If he told you to do something, you knew you better do it. But I always heard the defensive players talk about what Coach Russell had said. He was always telling some kind of funny story or funny joke. And I was jealous, really, because they had a relationship with somebody special. And then in 1980, there was talk going around that he was interested in the job down here. Well, I didn't believe it at first, so I called him. I called him on the phone and I said, Coach, I always called him Coach till the day he died. I never called him to his face. I tried one time, but I just couldn't do it. But anyway, when I finally got him on the phone, I said, Coach, I said, this is Bruce Young down there in Statesboro. And there's rumors going around that you're interested in the job at Georgia Southern. And he said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, it's a win-win situation for me. I mean, I'm a Georgia graduate. So if you stay up there, I know they're going to do good, and I'll support Georgia. Of course, I earn my living in Statesboro, and that depends on how well the college does. So if you come here, that would be great. Are you interested? And he said, well, do you think folks in that area would support? And I said, yeah, I think there'd be a lot of support for it. And he said, well, what about athletes? You think we could get athletes? And I said, you know, yeah, we could get athletes, but the funny thing was he never would answer my question. But when I hung up the phone, I told my wife, I said, Carol, he's interested in this job.
Good evening. My name is David Murkison, and tonight I would like to introduce you to Dr. Del Presley. In 1969, Georgia Southern was coming out of a fairly dormant period, both academically and socially. Only at the end of Zach Henderson's 20-year administration as president did he allow fraternities and sororities. This made us resemble a modern American college. So in 1969, there was a spirit of change. And Dr. Idson, when he became president, focused on making Georgia Southern a university. And his successor, Dr. Pope Duncan, did the same thing. And that continued with some difficulties in 1977 when Dale Lick became the president. Now, Dr. Lick's idea was, well, we may not be a university yet, but at least we can act like one. So he enhanced the academic programs and encouraged innovations like the opening of the museum. And you know, we talk about Ert Russell's impact on integrating Georgia Southern. Dale Lick keenly believed in equality and affirmative action and focused on university status to move us at a faster pace in that area. So I'll have to give Dr. Lick credit for that. He did that despite the Board of Regents, who rebuffed his leadership. And you know, the big thing he did was to listen to the people of southeastern Georgia. He would have these forums, and he would talk about what Georgia Southern needed to do to become a university. He heard the same thing over and over again. He heard, you need to resurrect the football program, because that was such a key component of the Georgia Southern story in the 30s and 40s, back when, before the program was suspended because of World War II. So that's how the football thing started. Dale Lick wanted to make us a university, and football was the way to do it. So I will have to give Dale Lick credit. And a lot of people worked with Dale behind the scenes to make it all happen. And Dale Lick got this group of local citizens, and they worked hard to raise money. They weren't deep pocket people, just ordinary people. Very enthusiastic people. Man, they got together, my goodness, things started to happen.
My name is Rilla Smith, and I am pleased to perform Miss Kirby Leen Stevens. Well, I graduated from Georgia Southern in 1955 and came back in September to be the secretary to the president. I served under 7 presidents. 2 of them were acting, of course, but there were 7 of them. And I was in that position for 32 years. Then I served for 5 years in special projects and alumni relations. So when I retired in 1992, I had been at Georgia Southern for a total of 37 years, not even counting my time as a student. Now, when Dr. Lee started talking about football, I, in my brilliance, was opposed to it, and I told him so. Because they would say, oh, we don't get the money, but I didn't see any money. I didn't see anybody walking in saying, I'll give $1 million, so I was apprehensive. I didn't want us to be second class. So I told Dr. Lick, I am opposed to it, but when you do it, not if, but when you do it, I'll be one of your strongest supporters. And I have been all for it, gung-ho. And I really enjoyed all the coaches, save one, but nevertheless, never dreaming that we could hire Ert Russell away from Georgia.
My name is John Groover, and I'll be performing the memories of Perk Robbins. At the University of Georgia, I held the same job that I held here at Southern, Vice President of Development and University Relations. At Georgia, my relationship with Ert was not the same as it was here. I mean, we had a few beers I considered Irk my best friend. I'm sure a lot of people considered him their best friend. And he probably was one of my greatest heroes. You know, good and nice are simple words, but they, more than anything else, describe Irk. His philosophy of coaching was do right. He practiced it, and he expected his players to practice it. I was at the hospital when he died. It was Gene, Tim Durden, Coach Van Gorder. About a month before he died, he sent me a handwritten letter. He kept me up to date on the regulars at Snookies and what was going on during the football off season. I spend my summers up in Michigan. Before I left, Irk had said he was going to write me every week. So he started out his letter by saying it was 8 weeks late. But I think you'd rather hear about my first football game up at Georgia in 1973. I was up in the president's box, and I looked down along the sideline, and there was this bald-headed man walking back and two. And he would take that bigger bald head, and he'd begin to beat against the helmets of the players. And he kept beating their helmets until a small trickle of blood would start to come out of his forehead. And when they saw that blood, the linemen, I mean everybody, got all excited, got all fired up. And I turned to President Davidson and I said, "Who is that man? And what's his deal?" President Davidson said, "Well, that's Irk Russell. He happens to be the best defensive coach in the United States." Now, when Dale Lick was president of Georgia Southern, he would arrive at my office in Athens unannounced, just to talk over a few things. I was doing free consulting for Georgia Southern before I even came here. And I will tell you that the two things that I suggested to him, he ignored. First, he wanted to have a capital campaign to raise $1 million for Southern. And I told him that the college was just not ready. Then he told me he wanted to start a football program. And I told him that was the dumbest idea I had ever heard. But what I didn't know is that he was going to come to Georgia and steal Irk Russell. And secondly, nobody, including Irk, knew what a great coach he was going to be.
I can still, to this day, I sit back there sometimes and I almost think I hear him laughing out here.
Something's happening, something's going on. Something's happening, something so strong. Something's happening, something all over the world.
Hey, how you doing?
Oh, hey. After my class this afternoon, I'm leaving.
My roommate Kevin knows a couple of guys in the house on Zennerar. He says they throw great parties. You should stay in town this weekend and hang out.
Man, and thanks.
But you go home every weekend.
Oh, I didn't say I was going home. My big sister goes to school in Athens, so I'm going to go up there and visit her. The city in Athens is so much better. As soon as I can, I'm going to transfer there.
You don't like Georgia Southern?
That's not it. I love Georgia Southern, actually, from Monday morning to Friday afternoon. I love my professors. Most of them. I mean, I don't want to sound cliche, but I want the marching bands, football games, people wearing school colors. So what if it's corny?
But,
What was that about?
They're talking about wanting football again.
I thought we were going to add a nursing program to become a university. Now explain to me how football is going to make any of that happen now.
Something's happening, something's going on.
You know, people came in and said, "Is it true? Is Irk Russell really coming?" Hello, my name is Susan Jackson, and this is Alice Chastain. And still people come in and say, is it true? Well, where did he sit when he came in? And they'll see the newspaper articles and the magazine articles on the wall, and they'll sit right here. Well, they'll stand right here in this booth and read every article, word for word, just as, well, you know, well, I guess we'll get to that.
In 1980, Dr. Dale Lick, president of the college, hired David Bucky Wagner to be his athletic director. In October of that year, he appointed a committee to look into bringing football back to Georgia Southern. Between Dale, Bucky, and Rick Mandes, director of institutional development, the possibilities began to take shape.
Hi, my name is Mike Humphrey, and tonight I will be David Bucky Wagner. Well, what we needed was somebody with name recognition, because our program, well, you know, we didn't have a program. We were out raising money with Dale Lick, who was a very enthusiastic man, but he'd never played football. And Rick Mandes, the fundraiser, he'd never played football. I played it. Of course, nobody knew who I was then in the South.
Hello, I'm Glenn Spell, and I have the pleasure of portraying Mr. Rick Mandes. So, Dale has been named the new president of Georgia Southern. He has flown down from Old Dominion, where he's still director, where he's still So Dale has flown down from Old Dominion, where he is still dean. And he's down here for the Shingle Intercollegiate Golf Tournament. So he's sitting on a bench by himself, and up walks Newell D. Anderson. Now, get in mind, she's late 60s, elegant, beautiful, perfect Southern belle. The only thing missing was the parasol. So she walks up to Dale and she sits down, she says, President-elect Lick, I'm Newell D. Anderson. And he says, well, how nice of you to come out. She says, well, I have a purpose. Now, there are 3 things that you must accomplish during your presence at Georgia Southern. First of all, we must have university status. Now, she's saying that like we've got to put a baker on campus. And the second thing is that we just must have a standalone doctorate. And the third thing is that we just must have football. Now, those are the 3 things that you must accomplish during your presidency. Well, Dale he's pale by this time, and he's sitting there holding on to the bench. But he comes down and he gets to work on the first 2. I mean, after all, the deans had said that we were going to be a university, and with just a little help, we can offer a doctorate of education, administration, or instruction. So, let's fast forward to 1979. Now, I take Dale down to Brunswick to speak to the Rotary Club. And we're headed back up Highway 17. And we're in my big old yellow Cadillac, which caused chagrin in all my children because it was awful. So we're easing up on the I-95, and Dale takes off his shoes and jumps up into the front seat of my car, Indian style, and says, let's talk about football. And before we got back to Statesboro, he had asked me to put together a feasibility study and a marketing survey. And that's how it all started. He got the faculty together, and he told them, and they harangued him. They said, you're going to ruin our institution. Where are you going to get the money? But he withstood it, and he gave them good answers. So he calls me a little later, and he says, I'm making an announcement tomorrow. We're starting football. And we started.
Well, now, Bruce's office is what we call the back room, and that's pretty much where football started, you know. Now, that little office is where they met to bring back football to Georgia Southern, and it all started right here with Bruce and Buck.
Yeah, the Dirty Dozen, who were going to go out and let people know we were interested in starting football. Now, the Dirty Dozen wasn't really a dozen. It was, I don't know, 8 or 9. There was me, of course, Bucky, Bruce, Bobby Underwood, who's passed away, Bobby Olive, Frank, he owned the lumber mill.
Pearson.
Frank Pearson, Cy Waters, I don't know, there was maybe 5, 6, or 7.
There was Bobby Underwood, Bobby Olive, Frank Pearson, Cy Waters, Sammy Johnson. There was Roy Akins, Al Burke, Hugh Colson, Jimmy DeLoach, Morris Lupton, Robert Lamb, Ronnie Pope, you and Bucky, of course, and Nate. How many is that? Did I leave anybody out?
Well, that's not a dozen.
Well, it's a baker's dozen.
Well, anyway, that's the names of those of us who went out to let people know we were really serious. And we worked for like 5 or 6 months going around doing the work that had to be done.
Well, we were pursuing, what we needed really most was somebody who had a name that was recognizable in the South. Somebody that everybody would know, household name. We've been talking to Red Parker. He was head coach at Clemson and then was head coach at the Citadel. He took the job, took it and refused it all in one day. We were talking to a fellow named Fulcher, used to coach at Georgia Tech. And then we were talking to that kid that played quarterback at Georgia.
Ray Goff.
Ray Goff. He was coaching over in South Carolina. And then, Burke and I were at a golf tournament down in Brunswick, Georgia. And at dinner that night, he looked over at me. He said, I was wondering, if you decide to start a football program at Georgia Southern, you give me a call. And I did. And I went up to talk to him in Athens, and he came down to Statesboro. Well, you know, Ferg was interested. He had the best name recognition of anybody.
Yeah, well, I interviewed Ray Goff. And he said, yeah, I'd like to be your coach. But the man you really ought to get is Coach Russell. So, anyway, what happened then was that Dooley pulled the Auburn trick. Now, Auburn had been after Dooley. And Georgia was getting ready to go to the Sugar Bowl. And President Fred Davidson calls Irv and says, look, if Vince goes to Auburn, you're the new coach. Well, it all turned out to be kind of a wanderlust. Vince wasn't going anywhere. But when you just think of how close he came to being the head coach at the University of Georgia. So anyway, he calls his good friend Frank Inman, who was the retired offensive coordinator from Georgia, and he said, Frank, find out if those folks down there at Georgia Southern are serious. Well, Frank immediately called Dale. Dale called me and Bucky. We thought he was kidding. We absolutely thought he was kidding.
Dale Lick had the courage and believability to ask her to come. Bert Russell would look people in the eyes to determine who they were and what they were up to. And Burke could tell that Dale was genuine and had no hidden agenda. Burke also knew that Dale Lick had done a lot of heavy lifting. For example, Burke knew that Dale had overwritten the faculty senate. That famous opinion survey, well, it revealed that the students supported football and the community supported football, but not the faculty.
I really don't remember the first time that Coach Russell came into our office. If you read the history of the football program, you'll find that Dr. Lick made him away from campus. When he came to town for an interview, if he came in our office, it was after hours, and I was not there. But it was well into the decision-making process before I even knew he was going to be the coach. He was just in and out, unbeknownst to me. I mean, it was really hush, hush, and the others that were in the Dirty Dozen, now they were the nucleus of the thing.
I let my family in on it at the time. And Deanne, who was my daughter, who was 16 at the time, she was just so over the idea of her coming. Earth was down, he was there at the Holiday Inn, and Dale called me and said, can you get a ride with me? And I said, well, sure. So I picked her up, and we were on our way back home, and we were near the place where, the house where Deanne was babysitting. And now, picture this. Earth's got on, he's got on a white golf shirt, khakis, beautiful saddle options, great looking sports coat. I mean, you can imagine what a figure he cut that night. So anyway, I told her, I said, do me a favor. So we pull up at the yard where Deanne's at, and we walk up to the front porch. I ring the bell, I step aside, and Deanne comes to the door, and she says, oh my God, Coach Russell, oh my God, Coach Russell, please, please say you're going to come to Georgia Southern. And he said, Deanne, honey, I had one more remark like that, and I think I will come. Then I stepped out.
Well, I think one of the funniest stories I ever heard was Earp was coming down here to interview for the job. Or maybe he already had the job, I don't remember, but anyway, apparently he was speeding because Ted Reiner, who was a state patrolman at the time, stopped him, and he recognized him. He said, Coach, what's your hurry? And he said, well, I'm going down to Statesboro to talk about that job. And Ted said, well, don't let me stop you if you need to get on the road.
Now, I don't know where he was coming from, but he was late for a noon meeting with Dale Lick. And this was the first time they were going to meet in person. I mean, they talked on the phone several times. The Earp was running late, and it was Frank Inman's honor and integrity that had got him interested in this job to begin with. So anyway, he wanted to know if these folks were for real. So out about 20 miles from Statesboro, over in Candler County, just maybe on the other side of the Meadow, it was a sheriff, or a sheriff's deputy, that pulled him over. Not a state trooper. And he said, Coach Russell, what in the world? And Earp says, man, I am late for a meeting. And the guy says, well, what is it? He says, well, I'm thinking about going over to Georgia Southern to coach football. And he said, well, go on. And if you get a ticket, call, here's my number, call me, we'll take care of it. But we need you, Coach Russell. Just don't kill yourself between here and Statesboro. Well, that's the first true story about any knowledge that Earp was coming.
You know, man, you know all the stories. Why don't you tell them that story about Williamson?
Well, we had a meeting over at the Frank I. Williams Center. It was a Sunday morning. There was about 30 or 40 people there who were really interested in football at Georgia Southern. And I never will forget what a wonderful thing that Bucky did. Earp had just gotten up and he had thanked everybody for coming out and to let people know he was seriously interested. And now it was a mesh of community people meeting Earp under controlled circumstances rather than a maddening crowd. And so Earp got up or sat down. When he finished anyway, Bucky stood up and he said, well, there's one thing I'd like to say, is that I just hope that we can change the crowd to equal. And it just about brought the house down. It just about brought the house down.
And you can't talk somebody into leaving the assistant head coach's job at the University of Georgia unless they're ready to come. Now, Earp wanted to do something different. And what I tried to do was make sure that he didn't suffer because of it. You know, he'd just gotten a raise at the University of Georgia. And we offered him the same money he was making, maybe $1 or $2 more. And you know, having the restaurant here just kind of evolved into a place where he could start his day. And you know, I don't ever remember him asking for a thing. One thing we did know early on was he'd need a place to live, and the Southern Boosters kind of took care of that.
But you know, I remember Cy Waters got him a freezer, and Cohen Anderson filled it with a side of beef.
Yeah, Earth wasn't playing hard to get. He was struggling with equity in his house, and he knew we didn't have anything to offer here. I mean, he was going to have to play on the high school football field. What do we really have to offer him? So anyway, I called Earth early one Thursday morning. He said, "Okay, Mandy's, what you got this time?" And I said, "Well, let me tell you a story." Well, at that time, J. Robert Smith was pastor of the First Baptist Church in Thompson, Georgia. And Jack Nelson Averett was dean of the graduate school and head of the pulpit committee at First Baptist Church here. Well, First Baptist had been after J. Robert, and he just kept saying, "Look, I got a great parish, got great parishioners, great parsonage." Well, First Baptist just wouldn't give up, and they, the last time they went to see him, it was an evening service, and after the service, J. Robert and his wife had the pulpit committee over for pie and coffee, and as they were leaving, Dr. Averett, he calls J. Robert over to the side, and he says, "I know you have everything you need here, but there's one thing that you have, or that we have, that you don't have here. We need you. We need you." So I said to her, "Man, you got it made up there. Great jets, great helmets, great football stadium. But there's one thing that we got that you ain't got there. We need you. We need you." Well, Earth called David, and he said, "Coach Lee, if you can offer me $1 more that I'm making at the University of Georgia, I'm coming." So the next morning, Earth calls me. He says, "Mandy's, put something together for Saturday morning. I'm coming down. And I just want a place to let people know I'm changing colors and I ain't wasting time." Well, Earth came in that night. We rode around, drank a six-pack. And then on Saturday morning, we walked into the Hannah Field House. And there were 400 or 500 people there. Somehow they just knew. And the place went nuts. It went nuts. People were crying. I mean, this is an icon. This is one of the top 10 figures in coaching in the whole United States. I mean, he is known from Connecticut to California, from California to Miami. I mean, this is the man.
Well, when Earth came, we had nothing at all. Day before he was going to come down, we realized we didn't even have a football. We sent somebody over across the street, Kmart, where it's a grocery store now. He came back with football, only he got the wrong one. It was just a little youth football. It wasn't even a big one.
But that is not so.
Oh, man, I gave
that
you the
is
football.
not so.
I
It was
know.
a regular
All the
football.
excitement.
Hello, my name is Eileen Baines, and I had the pleasure of interviewing Pat Hirsch, and I'm honored to bring you her story. My husband Nate was on the planning committee to bring in football, and part of that first crew that got together with the business people. Nate was in the Booster Club at the time, and so he lived and breathed it. Nate's always been a sports fanatic. In fact, people always kidded him that he only bought the radio stations just to put more sports on. So we were very involved when Earth first came to town. All the interviews and stuff, it was just a constant discussion on the telephone and in our home. It was just 24/7, every waking moment. The day of Earth's first press conference, we were at the mall, and Nate was going to interview Earth live on the radio. I was standing there with Nate and our daughter Sandy, who was about 18 months old at the time, and I just put Sandy down for a moment, and she went straight up to Earth and lifted up her arms. Now, he's being interviewed live on the radio, and he did not miss a beat. He just bent down and scooped her up and held her. And a picture of that that went out all over the state at that time.
In my movie script about football at Georgia Southern, I have it where it's 1938, and it is cold. And we're out there in our old leather helmets and our baggy breeches, and we've got on the sweaters that have the big TC for Teachers College. And we're going for a field goal. And the kid kicks the ball, and it goes sailing through the goal post, and it's all in black and white and opaque. And suddenly it goes into the bright sunlit sky and lands out there on that field, and it's in full color. And the field is Paulson Stadium, and it is packed. And working the sidelines is Herb Russell. And Herb's face just zooms up on that screen. And then he talks about how he came here in '81 and went on to win that first championship in 1985.
Georgia Southern written on it. I think this guy's serious.
Hey, listen, I played football in high school for 2 years. I was fullback and linebacker, JV defense.
Oh, wait a minute. So you mean to tell me that you're going to try out for a college football team coached by the meanest looking man in the state with just 2 years of junior varsity football under your belt?
Yes, sir, I am.
Bring along down to Bob and Bill. Ask everybody on the hill. We're going to have a great big thrill. Join us now and drown us.
I wonder how those open tryouts for the football team went.
Well, according to this, our coach and he said was greeted by some 126 of the most enthusiastic non-athletes I have ever seen.
Sounds promising.
Let's get physical, physical. Oh, let's get physical. Let's get physical. Everybody talk.
And everybody was, you know, kind of mesmerized by him for the fact that they got to sit at the table with Earth. Now, we have 2 round tables, and at the first round table, well, there's no actual name on any chair, but you knew just about where everybody would sit and what time they would come in. So you know this is where Coach would sit, so they wouldn't sit in Coach's chair. Now, one of the guys who had been here for a long time, well, that didn't thrill him as much, but you could always look around during football season or something like that. Or if we had something going on in town that would bring new people in, or tours, or families with kids coming to college, well, they were just amazed that he came in here. Is that him? Is that Coach Russell?
I think his name gave credibility to the football program, and his personality gave it the reality that it was something special. I mean, his personality was more than magnetic. People just wanted to be around him.
Oh, he would come in the mornings, usually around 8:30 or so, either with an apple core or banana peel in his hand, because he'd eat one or the other every morning, and he'd throw it away in the trash and then sit down for coffee. He'd order a whole quart. Really?
I remember he was sitting around this table one day, and he looked out that window, and he said, "You know, that would be a good place for a practice field." And Wayne Johnson, who was in the irrigation business and everything, and Joe Smallwood, who was in the grassy business, well, they got together and started talking. And the next thing you know, they go over there, they grass that field, and they irrigate it, and we got a practice field. He didn't have to ask somebody would they do something. All he had to do was mention it, and it was done. And you know, that was kind of fun to watch. Everybody wanted to be a part of it like that. And I think that's what made it work. It was a blue-collar effort. I mean, people gave $5 a year, $10 for 3 years, and that wasn't a lot of money, but it was important to them. And I really think that's what made it work. I mean, I know Alan Paulson gave $1 million. And M.C. Anderson was responsible for the bowl where the stadium is, and that cost a bunch. But I think what made it effective and fun for everybody was everybody wanted to be a part of it like they were.
And Eric brought some equipment down from the University of Georgia. I drove down to Tallahassee to Florida State, and over to Gainesville to the University of Florida, over to Mississippi State, Mississippi, Vanderbilt. We got all kinds of gear and all kinds of weird sizes, like extra, 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 extra large. I mean, we had all kinds of stuff that we begged and we borrowed and we bought used, and we ended up trading some of it over here, trading some of it over there, and we managed after a while to get all our troops suited up on the field.
Yeah, and Irk did fundraising in his own way. When we first started out, we went to little places like Vidalia, Eastman, Macon, and his favorite program was folks. Give me $2 for a chin strap, $4 for a jock strap, $5 for a jersey, $20 for a pair of breeches. I need it all. And then he would go and talk about the dream of giving some young man who was a few pounds lighter or a few steps slower the chance of playing football in 1A.
And when Irk came here, he didn't even have an office. Robert Underwood's daddy-in-law sold mobile homes. He had a repo down in Brunswick, man. It was an old-fashioned trailer, 60 or 70 feet long. We drove down there, pulled it back to Statesboro, parked it behind the Hannah Field house, and hooked it up, and that's where Irk's office was. Of course, his office was back in the back, where the master bedroom used to be, and behind that was this bathroom. Man, it was feminine. It had this big garden tub, and all around that tub with these frilly pink curtains. Man, it was pretty. It was pretty funny. And Irk used that, like he used everything. He said, "You know what?" He said, "Our office is still on wheels. We don't win, they're going to pull us out of here. They're just going to hook us up and drag us off."
Yeah, his personality was something. I mean, his sense of humor was really something else. You know, we were a lot alike. We both loved practical jokes. And we really couldn't take each other seriously because I'd tell him something and he wouldn't believe it, and he'd do the same thing to me. But one thing I remember was early on, I used to call out to his office, and his secretary wouldn't always recognize my voice. And I'd say, "Well, this is Woody Hayes or Bear Bryant." And then Coach Russell would get on the phone and he'd say, "Don't do that."
Hello, I'm Dwayne Rice. Tonight I'm representing Dr. Bill Perry. We came in November of '81, which makes it coming up on 27 years. We came the first year as early. Of course, I'm a minister. When I meet new people, somebody's always saying, "Be careful, he's a preacher," or something like that. The first week I came a week before my family could come, so I stayed with members of the congregation. I stayed with Bruce's parents, Snooky and Nancy yawned. So I ate breakfast at Snooky's, and one morning Snooky said, "You got a minute? Let's go. I want to introduce you to Coach Irk Russell." So I went over to Irk's makeshift office that he occupied, and he said a funny thing. He stood up and he said, "Well, preacher," he said, "I got a real building program here. I got a lot of work to do to get a football team started." He said, "But I understand you're the new preacher at First Baptist Church, and I got to tell you, I've met a few of your deacons, and you got a lot of work to do too." He just hangs you in stitches. I know you've heard these over and over again, but one of my very favorite ones attributed to Irk is the story about Irk and the young graduate assistant that he was sending out to recruit. And Irk said, "Son, you know there are some players that get knocked down and they just stay down." And the graduate assistant said, "That's not the kind we want, is it, Coach?" And he said, "No, son, that's not the kind we want." He said, "You know there's some players that get knocked down, they get back up, and they get knocked down and they stay down." And the young graduate assistant said, "That's not the kind we want, is it, Coach?" Irk said, "No, son, that's not the kind we want." He says, "But you know, there's some players that get knocked down, they get back up, and they get knocked down, they get back up, and they get knocked down, they get back up." And the young graduate assistant said, "That's the kind we want, isn't it, Coach?" And Irk says, "No, son, that's not the kind we want. We want that fella that's been knocking all the others down. That's the one we want." So I've used that story from time to time. You know, life does sometimes just knock you down, but you do get it back up. But sometimes you can be the knockee, if you will. There's another story I'd like to tell, but I couldn't really tell it in church like I'd like to, but it's a bit risque. But it's the story about the little boy who went in the bathroom and he come out and his pants were all wet. And he said, his dad said, "Son, what happened to you?" And he said, "Well, Dad," he said, "I went into the bathroom and there were only two places in there." And he said, "There were two guys standing there and one couldn't start and one couldn't stop it. I just couldn't wait."
Well, for the capital campaign, we had 18 rallies. And it was usually dinner at a country club or some other nice place. We knew that if we had Irk on the program, we would get a crowd. And Irk would get up and, you know, they didn't come to see Dick Henry, the president. They didn't come to see Irk Robbins, the vice president. They wanted to see Irk. And he would tell 4 or 5 stories. And I'll just mention a couple of things here. The first one's kind of become a classic. He would look out at the crowd and he would say, "Is there anyone here from Clemson?" And there would be somebody there from Clemson, or somebody who knew somebody from Clemson. And then he would say, "What you might not know is that originally it was called Clem University." Now, the students, faculty, the alumni, they didn't think that was a very sophisticated name, Clem University. So they began a search to change the name. And after 2 or 3 years, they came up with S-O-N. Now, the S would stand for chivalry, the O for honor, and the N for knowledge. Oh, my. Now, for the capital campaign, he said that our slogan was going to be G-A-T-A. Now, those of us around the football program, we knew what that last A really stood for. But if there was a mixed crowd, he would say it stood for Get After Them Aggressively. But for the capital campaign, he said that G-A-T-A meant Get After Their Assets. Now, he did tell a few other stories in private, but I don't think I'm going to tell those in public.
Oh, you know, kids would come in, and if there were a couple of little boys, and he's sitting there with his little cigar, and he'd say, well, you know, it wasn't lit, you know, and he'd say, "Here, you want a puff?" They'd look at him and laugh and say, "No." He usually came back in the afternoons, too. He'd get here at 8:30 and then around 3 o'clock, but I was gone by then. Well, one day when I had to come back for something, I saw him in this Santa Claus suit. Now, here he was with no hair, no beard, no hat, just this bald head and a red Santa Claus suit. So, you know, that's the way he was. Oh, he'd come back for lunch too. He'd come over to the buffet and he'd get a plate, he'd heap it full of turnip greens. And we'd cook our turnip greens in ham hock, and he'd usually go dig out that ham hock and then go tell Bruce, well, I got my meat free today.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Williams, and I'm honored to play the role of my spiritual sister, Charlotte Woody. Snuggins, I knew a bit, but most people that I knew went to Sarah's place at least twice a day for coffee. Sarah's place was a place for entertainment. I even had an opportunity to sing some, you know, as a college student at that time. I came to Georgia Southern in 1980 as a full-time employee. I was a clerk in the Vice President of Academic Affairs office, and I became a part-time student about the time Ert was starting the football program. So everyone knew who he was and what he was here to do. Georgia Southern had celebrated most of its activities around the basketball season, you know, like homecoming. But the football program took us to a new place relative to the type of activities that were being planned. When he did appear, it was a big deal, but I didn't know how big of a deal it was because I didn't know much about football at the time. I remember when I first met him, it was in one of those PE running classes. You know, one of those classes where you had to run the mile in 12 minutes. I was in the gym running one day, and there he was. He was actually running himself. And I was running up those steps. I was going back and forth, back and forth. And he stopped and came up to me, and he gave me some pointers on what I could do to improve my conditioning. That was the kind of person he was, and I'll always remember that. You know, I really came to know him through the eyes of his players like Tracy Ham and others at that time. We were part of the Eagles wing. We had a swimming pool at that time, and these young men, the football players, would come over to swim, and we'd cook for them. They'd turn around and wash dishes for us and, you know, help us out tremendously. I think one young man, Doug, he eventually went into the ministry. We had 4 young men at different times, and one of them was Ted Woodard. Now, Ted's birthday was the same day as our daughter Mandy's, and another player's birthday was the same day as Sandy's. So we have celebrated their birthdays, and, well, our daughters adopted them like their big brothers. You know, they would do things like buy me corsages for their homecoming, and we'd cheer for them to get in the games, and, well, they were like our children, really. We have pictures of Ted. He was a black young man and a big, big guy. And Doug, the young man that went into the ministry, well, he had this bird. And we've got this picture of Ted sitting there with this bird on his head. Ted wound up being killed in an automobile accident. And his family came up from Jacksonville and were at our home. One thing I think people don't know about these players is that they were very involved in the community. Well, they'd go out to the schools and do a lot of Special Olympics work. Well, our youngest daughter, Jennifer, well, she'd go to the games and practices with Nate, and the sports information directors would bring players over to her.
He was coach I ever seen, and he hadn't said a word. He just had that mean look about him. And then, of course, some of the pictures of him on the sideline of the Florida-Georgia game, leaning on his head. And looking at him, I'm going, okay, it's the same guy that was head-wearing players on the sideline. But when he spoke about his plans for the school and plans he had for me, because my only question was I going to play quarterback? That was the only thing I needed to know before I decided if I was coming or not. So he laid out the program, and from there, it just took off.
You know, I do recall the football practices at Statesboro High School on their practice field because I had to pick up my nieces and nephews. I had an opportunity to watch the relationship between he and his students, and we all got to see what that turned out to be.
Yes, and you know, you get to the point where the coach sends you in to play, and it ain't practice no more. Something's bound to happen to your reality. My best buddy, Doug Cope, and his wife, and my wife at the time, and I went to that first game together, played there at the high school football field. And I woke up that morning and I said to Carolyn, now remember, I've been working on this thing for 2 years. And I said to Carolyn, I guess we're going to find out if it was all for real tonight. I said, I tell you, I'm going to lay my head in your lap. And if Doug says, oh my God, we'll never get there, or he just doesn't say anything at all and keeps driving. Well, we got about 3 blocks from the high school field, and those magic words came. Doug said, good God Almighty, would you look at that? And I raised up and looked, and there were hundreds of cars. I mean, it was like the field of dreams. The little girl said, Daddy, if you build it, they will come. Well, that was her. And people came because they knew they were going to experience a moment of historical, not hysterical.
Historic.
A historic moment. Something to remember forever. We walked on that field, and there were sheeps hanging over the fences on the sidelines saying, hi, Mom, send money. Just like NBC was going to be there. Well, we played the 4th fitting Doughboys. Let's see, we went on to play the Jacksonville Magnum Force and the Florida State JVs. Those were the 3 games we played that year. And the crowds just sat there in awe.
Had to make by far. All the other moves that I made coaching were more or less cut and dried. It was just a matter of let's go. And it just points out the enthusiasm and the great attitude that the people not only of Statesboro but southeast Georgia in general have toward our starting football program. I made up my mind that I'd never look back. We're in this thing and we're going to take the ball and go with it. And I've had no second thoughts about it at all. And then we have room for another, at least an 80-yard field that will run parallel to our full 100-yard field. And then farther on down is plenty of practice space, and then, who knows, this could turn into something on down the road that is really big. That's the way I see it.
Let's get something straight, Fred. Ever since this football phenomenon began, I've allowed you to talk me into the merits of high-profile team sports as they relate to an institution of higher education.
Check.
I've been swayed into understanding that the collective identity of a community and a college can be enhanced by a sport that's played just once a week for 3 months in the fall.
Check.
I've even been going to football games, wearing the fan regalia of my institution of employment, both at home and away. I've even been known to cheer.
Loudly.
Now you would have me consider that mysticism, which apparently springs forth as a brackish stream of filthy rainwater runoff, has some key role to play in the success or failure of this team. Am I following you correctly? Honestly, I don't care if it's tactics, psychology, or voodoo. I just really want to win the next game.
Me too, my friend, me too.
Hello, my name is Michelle Hankerson, and tonight I will be playing Miss Sandra Prince. You know, Irk was a dichotomous figure. From my point of view as a cheerleader, well, he was sweet. He was a good guy. He had a good character. To the cheerleaders, he was almost like a grandfatherly type figure. His shoulders were a little rounded forward, a little hunched forward, and that little shuffle he had, just like a sweet old man to us. But if you ever had the chance to hear him or see him out on the practice field or on his way to the locker room at halftime, oh, you saw that division. He could instill the fear of God into the biggest player. You couldn't even believe that this was the same person. But he also had a very good fatherly relationship with them. I mean, it was the whole winning attitude that the school and the community had at that time. GATA was get after their you-know-whats, and it was a mantra. It was a thing that drove our success. It's believing in a program, a system. And that system, well, that system was Irk Russell. Oh, and the rituals, especially when you think about the college-level football players. They're very ritualistic. Preachers. And so our players, beautiful Eagle Creek, well, it was a ritual that they believed in. It had powers to help them win. And that's all you need to succeed. It's faith in your ability and belief in the rituals that you do. So, for our players, bringing that beautiful, foul creek to an away game and sprinkling it all over the football players, the opponent's football field, well, in their minds, it could help them win the game. It was like having an extra player. No, it wasn't luck. Luck isn't something you believe in. They believed in Eagle Creek. And, well, it was important.
Hi, I'm Jane Rocker, and I'm excited to present to you Jane Page. Oh, I was a sports fan. I married into a sports family. My brothers-in-law and my first husband, the Page boys, they were all into sports, and if I didn't learn about sports, I couldn't stay in a conversation with them. So I read the sports pages, and I went to high school football games and college basketball and baseball games, and I enjoyed that. But I wouldn't say I was a fanatic. I was a fan. Now, I was a college professor, and I was doing a lot of research at the time, trying to move up in the academic ranks, and well, that was pretty much my life, my work, and my family, and the church. But I did enjoy sports, but not like I did when Irk Russell came. Now, Irk was a big buddy of all fans. He was so approachable. He knew you by name. Now, his real buddies, though, were the guys at Snooki's. Now, those were his buddies. But he was very friendly with all the fans, all the women fans, and all those of us who weren't Snookiites, too. You know, I didn't want football at Georgia Southern. It was not something I desired. I was afraid of having football in a small school like Southern because we needed our money for other things. And I voted against it. No, we cannot do this. We're not supporting the teams we have. And back then we weren't supporting them, so how were we going to support football? And then I thought about our community. The farming industry was struggling.
first husband, was on the chain crew. And my older son became a ball boy. He carried the balls, shirts, headphones, and so they were needed. They were needed to do things. And I was needed. I was needed to stand in the stands and cheer. Now, at first, we didn't have a band. And then when we did, we couldn't take them to the away games because there wasn't any money. So I had this little Radio Shack megaphone that my daddy had bought me, and I'd take that up in the stands and we'd go boom, 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 boom. Lots of times we couldn't take the cheerleaders because there wasn't any money for them either, so we'd yell, "Go Big Blue! Go Big Blue!" And then we'd get the megaphone. Boom, 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 boom. Go Georgia Southern! And the guys on the football team would tell us, "We can hear you all up there." And Ert would say, "We gotta have the 12th man. We've got 11 men on the field, but we gotta have the 12th man. That's the fans." And we were the 12th man. We were there. We were the 12th man. And well, it was exciting. I remember one time we had this big caravan ride to South Carolina State. And oh, it was big, and the policemen in all the little towns would stop traffic for us to pass through. It was a huge caravan, and you couldn't see the beginning, and you couldn't see the end.
I don't know who called the handball offense nickname, but if you go to Snooki's and ask Bruce Young who called it, I'm sure he knows. But it was simply a spread offense, and you know, as quarterback, you got to be able to make split-second decisions. Oh, I got a lot of attention. But we had a lot of awful good football players on our team. Money Shaw, we had Gerald Harris, Ricky Harris, Frankie Johnson, Tony Belford, and Coach Paul Johnson. Even today, Paul is one of the greatest offensive coaches in football. And I'm telling you, man, I mean, definitely, man, we were like maybe only 4 or 5% blacks at the college at the time. And I come back now, and I go, wow, it's amazing. And we basically all came here together. And we grew up together. And we really enjoyed playing together. Then you had Ert, who was obviously stringing it together, which made us a pretty good team. You know, when you have a team, you really have a fraternity. So you develop a brotherhood with those guys you played with. Black, white, it didn't make a difference. At the end of the day, you all going through the same thing. It's 110 degrees out, you're sweating, you're tired. Man, you can't even see color. All you want to do is make sure you get your work in so you get some opportunity to win. You know, when I think back on all the interviews I've done, I never had to answer the question about how's the race relation. I'm not oblivious. It's in our society. Is it in the South? Yes. But did we deal with it here at Georgia Southern at that time? No. I mean, it wasn't an issue. I never heard why we playing a black quarterback instead of the white quarterback. Because I think Ert did a good job of protecting this team. And if it went on, we never heard it as players. You know, your coach becomes like your father in college. They essentially give you a lot of guidelines. Not only to play football by, but also how to act off the field and in the classroom. Do right, he'd say. Do right. At the end of the game, we are pumped up and happy, and he goes, y'all have a good time tonight, but do right.
Statesboro and Bullitt County rallied around our football team and helped build it. Good evening, I'm Tyson Davis. Tonight I'm speaking on behalf of Tim Durkin. I remember the huge excavators out there digging the bowl to make the prettiest little stadium in America, and all the people who supported our team, they'd go out borrowing money to travel to the next game. And they had the Eagle Wing periods, or the home away from home periods, where a Statesboro family would adopt one or two athletes and have them over for Sunday dinner, or maybe just go over and do laundry, or maybe hang out with their kids, or swim in their pool, or fish in their pond, and just make you feel like you're at home. And now I get to build their houses. I get to renovate their homes, or maybe I do business with them, or buy insurance, or bank with them, and so forth. And it was just unbelievably touching how much respect they had for us as young men and as players. And coaches are lifelong teachers, and the blood and the sweat and the tears on the football field, the camaraderie of teamwork, that's what Coach Russell's about. Big team, little men. Put your team first. Yeah, he went to Johnson's Minute Mart, which was a famous place to buy your beverages after a victory, and I saw Coach Russell in there, and I was thinking about buying some beverages.
And you're thinking about giving us something, or thinking about the things that go along with being a college student?
I was walking in one door, and he was walking out the other door, and he goes, "Well, hey, Tim, how are you?" And I mean, what do you say? And he just says, "I just hope you have a wonderful, wonderful evening." And he says, "Isn't it awesome to be an Eagle after a wonderful victory on Saturday in Statesboro?" And he says, "Just remember one thing, do right." And a lot of people would have, taken disciplinary action against you, but he knew we'd worked hard and deserved an opportunity.
And all you can hear is, do right. And you can see him 9 o'clock in the morning. He comes jogging by. It'll be 114 degrees, and he comes jogging by. He say something like, "It's a great day to be an Eagle." Everyone go, "It's hot out here." And he's saying it's great. And so we're watching this old man run by. So we like, "Oh man, come on. We can't let that happen, right?" So we'll either jog with them or start our own little run routine. And that rattlesnake thing was the most amazing. Lynn Byers had just died. And Don Rogers, he was a defensive back for Cleveland. They both died of a drug overdose. We saw it on the news. Sometimes you think you're so far removed and it can't happen to you. But Coach thought it was important enough to come up with a well-thought-out demonstration. When he threw that snake out there, a brother scared a snake. So when you hear that rattle, there's no mistaking that. And for him to take the time to make that analogy with drugs, at that time when we were in our college career, it had a lot of impact. So his handprint is all over me as an individual, and certainly as a football player, because it gave us the ability to feel like nothing is impossible. Look, never say die. As long as you put your work in, you got a chance. As long as there's time on the clock, you got a chance. I remember particularly one game, Troy State. Troy State had a good football team. And he gave his general speeches. And on occasion, he pulled me to the side and said, "Tracy, we need this one." And that what made him so special, being able to talk straight to guys, being able to get the most out of guys. Once during practice, he told one guy, he said, look, I don't think you're good enough to play 1AA football. Man, that guy went out there and tore up everything. He just challenged the guy. He said, look, I don't think you're good enough. Go prove it.
You know, did I ever mention he was clever? He was always looking for ways to motivate people. I mean, just simple things. Hey, he came in here one day, and it was raining. And he asked me if I had a milk jug. And I said, yeah, I got a milk jug. What do you want? And he said, I'm going to get a little bit of that Eagle Creek water. And they were flying somewhere to a playoff game. And he said, I'm going to take a little bit of that Eagle Creek water with me. And I said, well, Coach, it's raining out there. Let me get it for you. And he said, no, you'll just go back there and get it out of the sink. And I don't want sink water. I want the real stuff. So I go back there and get him a milk jug. And then he asked me if I had a clothes hanger. So I get him a clothes hanger. And I watch him. He walks across that field in the rain, hangs off that bridge, and gets that Eagle Creek. And then he takes it with him on that trip, and he spreads it all over the field. You've heard that story before.
Oh, Mr. Eagle Creek water. I tell you what now, it was, come on, man. It was the dirtiest water in Statesboro. But we went on the road to places, and nobody was there with us. And he get one of his speeches as he poured the water, and you can see the guys going crazy. This is the day before the game, right? The guys are already running on in. Okay, all right, the community in Statesboro is with us. Man, those guys, whoever come up with the idea to have football here, other than Dale Lee, a long list of them gave money and really supported us, really believed in what was going on. That's what they know here in Statesboro. They know a winner. And we won. And so winning makes you blind to a lot of things, right? We all understand winning, right? It don't hurt as bad after the game when you win it. You know, the girls look pretty. And even the guys, we look a lot better when we win. And so winning cures a lot of heartache, man. And winning right here, certainly catapulted the program and tiered it to a different stratosphere.
It's December 21st, 1985.
And we're hoping for a miracle. The game seesawed back and forth until Furman took the big lead. But Georgia Southern came back and tied it in 28-28, and then went ahead a touchdown, 35-28.
Furman came back and tied the game by a score of 35-35.
Then Georgia Southern hit a field goal, and it was 38-35. But Furman just wouldn't quit.
They scored again to lead 42-38, and time was running out.
Time was running out.
There wasn't much time left.
A minute and 32 seconds left for history.
Man, we really need to win this one.
Just one more time.
Just one more time.
One more time! One more time!
One more time!
It's just 4th and 12 yards to go. Just 30 seconds left in the game.
One more time, please.
There was nobody open. Then Tony Besson was out there 14 yards away. We got the first down. Then 3 plays later, it was what Earth called 3rd and forever. Somebody in the huddle said,
Frankie Johnson's open.
then the play came in. It was called 378 million.
One more time! One more time!
One more time!
Time!
and that makes me real proud.
Nobody would let us leave the Eagle Creek water at home this trip, so we've got it along.
It never fails you.
Well, it hasn't so far. Never say never.
Our Eagles made it right back to the championship game the next year, but everyone still considered us underdogs. But we quickly showed up the favorites, Arkansas State. Maybe Tim Foley could have beaten them by himself, but the rest of the team put on a show. Early in the game, they tried to hang with our men in blue, but if Coach Russell ever worried, he never let it show. Their defense had told anyone who'd listened that week they had already faced the top 3 quarterbacks in the country, but Tracy showed them why. Coach said he could play tag in a phone booth and never be it. Tracy set championship game records for rushing and passing that day as the Eagles won 48-21. Afterward, our defensive guys said they faced the best quarterback in the country every day in practice.
Offense, defense, kicking game in one package. Tonight's performance overall is the best that we've had. Proud of Raymond Gross. He played so well. Not singling him out as being the only player. We had people that played their hearts out there for us today. Where's your mama? She's down there somewhere. I saw her. Last year after the Furman game, she and I cried together and said, hopefully, that we might have another chance, and we did, and he did good. Don't let her get away, because I want to hug her again.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Akins, and it's my privilege to present to you Dr. Nicholas Henry. I was president of the university when Ert retired. He called me Coach Henry, and I called him President Russell. And we both understood the implications of those titles because the university owed him a lot. Well, there were a number of things that coincided. One was winning football championships, and then the publicity. At the time, the Atlanta Constitution saw itself as the New York Times of the South. And so it covered Georgia very thoroughly. And Georgia Southern got a lot of play in the sports pages as a result. And then the Sports Illustrated article, a very major article about Earth, helped as well. But the Atlanta Constitution, in terms of the university's growth, was a major factor. So it was just a very happy combination. And Bucky was successful in getting the 1989 National Championship played in Statesboro, and that was very memorable.
You already heard about the time he had the rattlesnake in football practice and nearly scared the team half to death. He said, if you're going to do drugs, you might as well put your hand right down here on this rattlesnake. So I've used that in other humorous things he says from time to time. Art was such a man of integrity that I wanted to be a man of integrity too. He had that impact on me. He had a great influence over young people, and in many ways he set examples for even me to follow. Really. He was a man of his word. He loved people. He was committed to honor. So that personally encouraged me to live a life of integrity. Art was more than a football coach. His wide acceptance of African-American football players was obvious. From my observation, he had the utmost love and respect for his team, black or white or whatever. I think he helped us in those early 1980s to be more open in terms of integration and to be more inclusive. I think that helped us in our public schools and in our organizations. I know it helped us in our churches to emulate the acceptance that Irk had for all people.
Every time I'd walk into Snoopy's, Irk would be sitting right there, and he'd say, "How's Boyce? How's Boyce?" Talking about Nate. Or, "How's Boyce doing today?" Stuff like that. He was really into my children. I think right up until the time before he passed away, my kids would walk right up to him and just give him a hug every time they'd see him. Well, he was just like a big teddy bear. Anything with children, he was just like a big teddy bear. Of course, my kids were mesmerized by his bald head. They just wanted to touch it. But he was just a kind, gentle man. At least that's what he showed to us and to my family.
Although Irk was always warm and welcoming and made you feel like he had known you forever, I was a little on the shy side. And the first time he called me by name, I was real surprised he even knew who I was. But I know that this being the Emma Kelly Theater, Irk loved Emma. I remember on several occasions out at the country club when she was playing, Irk loved to sing along with Emma. She knew the songs he liked and learned to play them quickly so that when he walked in, she would, like she did with a lot of other people, she would start playing his favorites. And then Irk, cigar in hand, would stand by the piano and the whole group would sing with Emma. Now, as far as sitting down and chatting with her, I really never had the pleasure. He was sort of holding court. He had that kind of presence. Later on, we interacted more after I got my hip replacement and he had his joint replacements, and we would discuss our aches and pains and so forth. Much of that took place at Snooki's after we were both retired.
And after he retired, I asked Coach Russell to be the motivational speaker for our Home Builders Association. And I asked him, I told him, I said, "Coach, we're having a membership drive and I want to double our members." And he said, "Well, what would you like for us to do, Tim?" And I said, "Well, I'd like for you to talk to our association the way you talk to us." And he said, "What did I say?" And I said, "Well, Coach, I don't know exactly what it is you said, but you just had a way of saying it." And he said, "Well, let me think about it." He gave an awesome motivational speech. We got like 90 new members, and then after it, when I was thanking him, I told the crowd, I said, "All right, y'all want to witness this?" And I said, "Coach, I have always wanted to get a six-pack of tall boys and get you in a little bitty boat out in the middle of a big, huge lake and say, 'All right, you've got to tell me right now what it is that you have that makes you do what you do and makes other people do what they do. You're a life-changing person.'" Well, we're not out in the middle of a big, huge lake, but here's your six-pack of tall boys, and I want you to tell us just one more time what it is that you have. And you could tell that it really had an effect on him, being told how special he was in a completely different setting. I talked with Jay Russell, Coach's son, and Miss Jean Russell, Coach's wife, after they gave us permission to put the bust of Coach Russell in the end zone at Paulson Stadium, and they said that they didn't want anything big and gaudy. But the bust is, you can touch it. And it lets players know as they're running on the field that it's game time, and that is life-changing as well. There's probably 100 things that I could say, but I just want everybody in Statesboro, and Bullitt County, and Georgia Southern to know that I'm quite thankful for the opportunities that you've given me and my family and the support that you show us every day. And I just feel welcome.
In 1986, and for 4 or 5 years, I was the beginning cross-country coach. And that was around the same time as the start of the football program. You know, I had this locker in the basement of Hanner. Herc had a locker. We all had to share this lead pipe shower. You know, the water just kind of flows down on. There's no shower head or anything. It's very primitive. We were all in this together. Herc never asked for anything that his lowest coach or trainer didn't have. If it was good enough for them, it was good enough for him. He never asked for a lavish office or lavish headquarters. You know. And when we went on that first road game, all we had were those solid blue helmets, the cheapest we could get. And Herc passed around the ankle tape and said, "Today we are first class. Put a stripe on your helmet." And that goes more towards building team spirit than those guys could overcome huge obstacles if they believed in themselves. And he believed in them.
The football program has put Statesboro on the map. It was an exciting time for people like myself from corporations who were competing for positions with others from around the country. It was certainly key to my career during that season of my life. And a lot of the black alumni that we knew, would get together a lot of times and watch the games. There was an air of excitement around all of the unfolding events. I guess it was the football program because we really didn't have anything to compare it to at that time. I've heard people say that when I-16 was established, Statesboro had an opportunity to bring it closer to the city, but there were farming needs, and people thought Statesboro had given up its opportunity for growth. But the football program was like a seed that has been planted in this town, and it has produced a great harvest because we have businesses and retail and industry that has been able to succeed far beyond what was ever imagined. So I think there's a great big root that is spreading in this town because of the program, and it is emanating into a great big oak tree that will be firmly established for a long time to come.
I was in Atlanta in 1988, when the story broke that UGA was aggressively recruiting her to what at some point must have been his dream job. It was not a slow news week. Yasser Arafat had decided to recognize Israel as a legitimate state, and there was an earthquake in Iran that killed 25,000 people. Despite all this, the banner headline across the Constitution's front page was, "Herc may leave." Herc's possible departure from Georgia Southern was the dominating news story as far as the New York Times of the South was concerned. So, Herc did put Georgia Southern on the map. He set an example of how to be decent to people, how to treat people well, and how to motivate people. He had a positive impact on everyone he met. He was, in terms of those teams, he was just unbelievable. I ran into, well, I'll tell you that one off the record, I think.
Well, in 1988, when I was offered the job here at Southern, Herc called me on the phone and he said, "Herc, this is Herc." And he said, "You're going to love it here, and you need to take this job." Now, I would have taken the job anyway, but that was just icing on the cake. You know, Mary Lou and I love Statesboro. We love Georgia Southern. But to be so closely associated with Irk, well, that's one of the highlights of my life. Now, when I came here, I told Irk that I wasn't going to take off my national championship ring from Georgia until he won another national championship for Georgia Southern. And I did. But in 1989, when he won that national championship, I took off that ring from Georgia, and I got my Georgia Southern championship ring. I gave the other one to my son. Now, I'm a coin collector, and one day, Irk wanted me to go to his safety deposit box to show me some of his coins. And when he opened it up, there was a Ziploc bag with 6 or 7 of his national championship rings, watches in there. I mean, he never wore them. He was a humble man like that. Now, the first football game that I went to was in Pocatello, Idaho. I didn't know where Idaho was, much less Pocatello. And we should have won a national championship against Furman that year, but one of our best players fumbled the ball on the 10-yard line. Oh, it was so depressing. And during that time, it was even more depressing because the University of Georgia had called Irk and had offered him the head coach position up at Georgia. And when we got back to Statesboro, there was a whole crowd of people waiting. And some of them had signs, and they said, "Don't go, Irk. Don't go." But fortunately, he turned them down. He only stayed at Southern for one more year. But in that year, he went 15-0. And that was the highlight of Irk's career, to go undefeated during that last year. Oh, the only team in the entire 20th century to go 15-0.
And so, not only did he take us, he took this community. He took South Georgia. Our sense of pride in South Georgia is at the top of the flagpole because of Erskine Russell. And that's hard to prove, but it's there. Just take my word for it. It's there. Yes, it's a story that Irk didn't avoid, but it's a story that he felt was for the family alone. You know, a loss is a terrible thing for a family. So this is the story of Irk and Jean's middle child. There was Rusty, the oldest, Jay, the baby, and Don, the middle child. And years later, people wanted to talk to Irk about this, and Irk said, "No, we're just not going to talk about that now." And he didn't say it with any animosity. It was just kind of a shut-down thing. And the only reason I knew about it was that my good friend Louis Rizard, famous columnist, he had told me. He said, "If you ever get a chance to get Irk to talk about Don, you need to do that." So we're in the cellar of the Hannard Field House, and we're doing family in the book that we're writing together. And you know, I know about Don, but I'd never mentioned it. And Irk is sitting there. He's facing the wall, not looking at me, and he's rocking back into, and I'm sitting to his left. And I said, "Irk, you know, we've got to put Don in the book because, after all, that was such an important part of your life." So Irk says, "Okay, all right, man, these. Did you get it right the first time? Because I'm not going to say it again." So it happened when Irk and Jean were very young, and it was an afternoon, and Herc was off fishing at the pond with Rusty, who was, I think, 9 at the time. Don was 3. Jay was just a baby in the baby carriage. Jean was in the yard with the children, playing, and she had gone around and pushed Jay around into the front yard in his carriage. And in the backyard, there had been an old tire swing. And Jean had persuaded her to remove it because it was dragging the ground and it just wasn't a plaything anymore. So what was left was a piece of rope, maybe 3 or 4 feet long, hanging from the limb of that tree. So Jean is in the front yard, and she's caught up in the moment, and suddenly she thinks, you know, I wonder where Don is. So she starts to push Jay around into the backyard. In the meantime, Don had pushed his little fire engine or some little vehicle underneath that road, stood up on it, and somehow managed to get up in the road. And when Jean came around to the back of the house, Don was hanging there dead. So a good friend goes to the pond where Herc is at, and Herc's out in the middle, and he hollers, he says, "Coach, you need to come home." And Herc says, "How bad is it?" He said, it's bad. So, in the present tense, Herc, he says, you know, I walked through the valley for months and months and months. And then one day, it dawned on me that I had 2 sons and a wife, and that I had to put my life back together. He said, that's the story. So, Herc lost his little boy, and how he got into that, up in that piece of road, we'll never know. But we never talked about it again. We never talked about it again. And until the day Herc left us at the country store and died, it was never mentioned again. But it was part of his life, and it's in the book. You know, speaking of the book, we had to talk him into doing the book. He said, "Mandy, why do we do a book? Nobody gives a damn about me and my book." And he meant it. He was not being pretentious. Herc Russell was, he just didn't play games. The first thing he did when he met someone was that he looked them straight in the eyes. He was looking for honor. And you take that and you diagram it down. You give me your best, not for me, but for yourself. And when we walk into that locker room, whether there's a victory or defeat on that board, if we know that we have done our very best, that's what I want from you.
You know, I think the one comment I hear more than any other comment is, I miss seeing Coach Russell in here. After 25 years, writing the eulogy for his funeral was the easiest thing I ever had to write. But by far, the hardest thing I ever had to deliver. I don't think he really realized what a really big person he was, or what a big legend he was and is. He just never let on to it. If anything, I think it embarrassed him more than anything else. You know, I traveled with him on numerous occasions, and he was almost like traveling with a rock star. I mean, people just loved him, and they were drawn to him. I mean, no doubt, the excitement of football, I mean, look up on my walls in here, all the major magazines. Sports Illustrated wrote an article about it. The television stations would just come into my restaurant and turn it into a studio, and people got used to it. You talk about your $4 million football coach. If there were worth $10 million. That's not what he was in it for. He came to Statesboro and gave us everything he had to
He did a lot of interviews here at Snooki's. Reporters would meet him. They'd go and sit at a separate table, do an interview, and then he'd get up and come back to his place at the table. You know, he was just one heck of a nice guy. Very friendly, very outgoing. Always had a pleasant word for you. And he had a knack that he could remember things. If he met you, I don't know, maybe once or twice, and he could remember whatever you told him. Next time he saw you, well, how's this going? Or how's your mom doing? Or this, that, and the other. And if you had an achievement or something simple like that, well, he would praise you. He would encourage you. He was just a good, friendly man. No, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. Other than this new coach, Chris Hatcher, well, I think he's going to do a good job because he sort of patterns himself after Coach Russell. He seems to be a go-getter the way Coach Russell was, and I think that's going to help. He felt like the buses. Well, you don't screw with tradition. And for him to have driven the buses with the players to the game, well, none of the others did that, you know. They always had drivers. But here comes the first home game. And here comes Chris Hatcher driving the first yellow bus. Ah, he's a shoo-in now. That's the way it works down here. You get the players and you drive the buses. So, I think that's about him in a nutshell. But I do remember this one time when, they were all gathered around the table at Snooki's and they were talking.
I'm going to say it one more time. We're Georgia Southern. Our colors are blue and white. We call ourselves the Bald Eagles. We call our offense the Georgia Power Company, and that's a terrific name for an offense. And our snap count is rate hike. We practice on the banks of beautiful Eagle Creek, and that's in Statesboro, Georgia, the Nat capital of America. Our weekend